I would never punch someone in the face, and I have never punched someone in the face. But if that was what was standing between my life and my death, I absolutely would. I think that when you are standing before an undeniable enemy, one that you don't know how it's going to behave, how it's going to act, how it intends to kill you, you will be willing to do things that you normatively would not be willing to do, and quite simply, that's going to be our case today. Firstly, I think quite obviously the metric in this debate is where humanity survives more, where less people die, where we are better able to take on this enemy. Secondly, how do I think that this is likely to look? I think reasonably, you start by forming blocks with countries that are used to forming blocks with one another. This is firstly because oftentimes they have proximity to one another, but secondly because these are just countries that are used to doing business with one another. Why do I think that this is important? I think opposition are likely to try and come up and say that countries that have in the past been enemies will not want to talk to one another because they have this common past. And I think that when you have blocks, you don't necessarily need to have enemy countries negotiating with one another directly, and that already solves some of the problem by allowing these countries to talk in blocks and not necessarily in enemy countries, or send the countries within these blocks that are better friends with each other to hash out these talks. Great. Then, oh, that's so much nicer, thank you. Then, what do I think that you need to beat, an alien force that is all coming to kill you? I think you need four things. Firstly, and quite obviously, you need a military. This is at least right now the best way that we know to fight other people or other beings. And so if there's somebody coming to kill us, presumably we will have to use a military to block them or hurt them back in some way. Secondly, you need tech. If we don't use militaries to harm them back or destroy their ships or whatever, we will probably have to use new technologies to do so. And to have tech, you also need to have resources, you need to have oil and energy, etc. Thirdly, you need supplies, you need water, you need food, you need things to ensure that even if there's a blockade or something like that, your population is able to survive on the things that they have, and that there can still be, to the best extent, movement between countries so that people can have still have food to eat. Fourthly, and very importantly, I think you need information and you need researchers, you need people who are looking into this, who are trying to find out whatever they can about this alien species and to figure out how we can defeat them. To the extent that we have absolutely no idea what these aliens are going to look like, what they are, like what their fighting capabilities are. Clarification, sure.
Extraterrestrial means coming from outside of Earth. This also involves like asteroids or like whatever. This isn't a debate about aliens specifically.
It would be way more fun if it was a debate again about aliens, but either way, I think if there's like an asteroid coming to destroy Earth, then yes, you still need tech to see if you can use lasers to destroy it. You still need supplies. You still need researchers to figure out how to do this. Everything still stands. Maybe later. So anyway, to the extent that you don't know if this asteroid or alien or whatever is coming to destroy you and in which way, you want to maximize the resources that you have to ensure that you have the best chance of survival. To that extent, I think that you want to have the most out of all of the things that I just described. I think every country and every person within these countries wants to survive, whether it is because they care about their citizens and they want the well-being and welfare of their citizens, or because they don't care about their citizens, but they do care about themselves and their own survival. And to that extent, I think when this thing is coming towards you, you start considering what does your country have and what does it not have. And I think since we live in increasingly globalized economies that depend on exports and imports, no one country will have all of these things in a level that ensures that they are actually able to fight this thing or ensure the safety of their citizens. And when you come to that realization, I think that's the point at which you are much more likely to be willing to negotiate, to be willing to join forces with other countries, because you understand that without them, you are nothing. To that extent, I think you're also likely to want to agree fairly quickly, and you don't want to do things to anger other countries. Because if the one country that has cobalt, or the one country that has a lot of oil reserves, the one country that has like a specific, I don't know, wheat or whatever, pulls out, you then have a lot less wheat for everybody in your corner, and so you're a lot more likely to be willing to compromise. Before I continue, I'll take second.
Let me just get this clear. You think that people are rational enough to think that they will know all of this, and because of that they will decide to do so?
Not people, but the people who lead these countries, whose entire jobs anyway is to think about big picture things, to consider the larger survival of these countries. These are the kind of people who would also take care of the country if they were to go to war, who would have to consider the lives of these people, how to get resources. Yes, absolutely. Not Joe Schmo on the street, but the person who was elected to be in government and all of the experts that are around them. On top of that, it's not that I think that people are rational, but I think that when they face this existential dread, they are likely to want to behave in a way that maximizes their ability to survive. What do I mean by this fear? Firstly, I think that this is probably going to be the biggest thing that media talks about by a long shot from the second that we learn about this, basically until we either figure out or all die. I think that you will have either a video of an asteroid coming closer to Earth on every TikTok video that you watch, or a photo of an evil alien basically saying that he is coming to kill you. I think the level of fear that is instated both in people within these countries, but also the leaders themselves, is massive. What do I think that this means? I think firstly, it just means that literally your life flashes before your eyes. You are standing in front of your death and you need to make a decision. Do you stick to principles that are now not relevant to this new world order, or do you do what you need to do to survive? Secondly, I think it just reminds you of your humanity. I think in particular, if you're talking about an alien species, but even if it is an asteroid, I think to that extent, it just reminds you of your humanity. And that is the point at which you are a lot more likely to want to unite with other humans, to care about the survival of the human race. We know through science and through research that there have been so many species that have just been wiped out before us. We are the first species to have capacity to work together to ensure that we all survive. And I think that when you are literally stared into the eyes with your own mortality and your own death, you're far more likely to do that. What do I also think? Firstly, I think that when people are this afraid, they just stop living. They don't go to work, they don't go to school, they don't do anything, because what's the fucking point? Why go to work if there's an asteroid coming? I think at that point, if there's any chance of survival, governments want people to feel that it is taken care of, to feel that there is a reason to go on and to not go all purge mode. And so they are likely to try and do this quickly and loudly so that literally their people don't lose control. Secondly, I think you need as much time as possible in order to solve this problem. And so you're likely to want to do this as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. So you have the most time to do research. And I think for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, it disconnects you from your past. It disconnects you from past disagreements. For humanity, to save humanity, I think people will be willing to cooperate. OG.
I thank the Prime Minister for that speech, and I'd now like to ask about leader of the opposition. Here.
Sorry, I will not be able to hold the microphone because I usually need my both. Is it fine?
I mean, then you won't be able to hold it. That's
The alternative is
Okay.
you can go over there
Nah.
and try to use the camera.
I can manage. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. When faced with nuclear weapons, we made a race in order for the first to be the first state that gets it. When faced with climate change, we impose some regulation, but we kind of don't care about it because the other countries may lose out more. When faced with the COVID pandemics, we were trying to sell the vaccines as more expensive as possible in order to gain. Panel, I believe that states are inherently very selfish, and this will not change. The threat is unknown. It can't be objectively assessed. It's very new and distant and sudden. It's likely to not be able to be judged objectively. It's probably not homogeneous. We don't know which part of the Earth it will hit. We don't know which part of the Earth it will affect. We don't know who is the best prepared to handle it. We probably can't really judge what type of threat it really is. It's also quite abstract and very easy to downplay. We can simply be in denial, believe that as humans, our lives cannot simply end so suddenly of such a simple reason that that basically has no base. Because of history, we can believe that we always managed, so why not this time? This is exactly what happens with climate change. Maybe science will save us, maybe someone else will handle it. There are all kinds of those reasons. Governments will often have contradictory or varying assessments of all of those things. First of all, well, because it just happens. Scientists come to different conclusions. People in power have different beliefs. People are like a collection of their objective experiences. This means that my experiences can be different than your experiences, and thus my judgment can be a different judgment. But also, governments are also not homogeneous. There are different groups which filter the opinions of scientists, of experts. Before the opinion, the assessment reaches the decision maker, it gets filtered through lots of advisors and lots of different people, of people who have different interests. You have leftists and rightists. You have national narratives and hawks against China or maybe against Russia or maybe against Iran. You have different competing advisors who want to be the one who is actually right and who is actually correct. And in order to do so, well, he must differ from the others. You have religious or ideological governments who have like a primate of some ideology that is not necessarily the truth. Governments also vary in strength. They can have different amounts of money and different amounts of power. This also leads to them perceiving the threat differently. Maybe they believe they can handle it. But also, they have different particular perceptions of singular people filtering the threat and solutions, right? You can have a singular person who decides not to tell the truth to the president because he himself believes that the asteroid is actually not that dangerous and we can actually manage. And if I tell the president that we should not do something, he will be very, very happy and he will maybe promote it. Therefore, the solutions the countries propose vary. And all the countries believe that their singular solution is correct. Because, well, we have the best scientists, we have the best universities, we are the single strongest country. And also, because there is probably no singular answer, right? There are probably different ways to handle the threat. We cannot assess objectively which way of handling this threat is the best, right? This means that that the countries may, on their own, reach the best conclusion, but may not be able to, well, agree what the implemented conclusion, the implemented solution should actually be. But also, they can just be malicious. And this is the perfect moment to exploit your opposition. The people who you negotiate with, the different countries, are at pressure, right? They must agree. They must concede. If they don't, the threat will destroy them, right? They believe that, well, we can, for example, tell China to stop implementing tariffs on us. Or we can tell Iran to unblock the Strait of Hormuz, because if they don't, well, we are not going to join your magical organization and we are not going to cooperate with you, right? This means that very many countries at the same time are going to try to force something out of each other, right? And notice that in our current times, we have a lot of those unsolved conflicts that a crisis would be the perfect opportunity to solve at once, right? This also means that in the perception of the country doing the demanding, there is no danger. Surely, they will concede eventually because they are not idiots, right? And, well, we are going to exploit that. Lastly, other countries also know of this. I know that the Chinese may exploit the situation because, well, they think I'm at pressure, right? And I am mistrustful towards them, right? Because, well, it's logical for them to try to exploit me. It's logical for them to try to deceive me, to try to pressure me into something. It's happened in the past, right? We have had different solutions where the Chinese were stealing our patents or doing something malicious against us, even when faced with threat. We have had examples of countries hiding their nuclear research in clear violation of regulations. And also because of internal filters that tell me to be suspicious. You know, Mr. President, the Chinese have also always tried to fuck us over. Maybe this time they're also doing this, right? Also, there are just countries who may objectively calculate it differently. Maybe they have no resources to contribute to a singular effort, to a connected, united effort. Or maybe they have a lot of resources to spare and they believe that they should not share them with others because they can singularly handle the problem themselves, right? This means that they believe a collective effort is simply not worth it. Why share the solutions with others? Why believe that you should, for example, help the other countries in defending against this problem? Or why, if you are so poor, actually diminish the lives of your population, make their lives worse by putting taxes on them, by taking away their resources and contributing to a threat that is going to be solved anyways. If China and Russia and maybe the US can contribute to it, they could probably solve it, right? Why me as Germany or Egypt should contribute to this effort? I don't really think so. But also, lastly, the threat simply may not be homogeneous. Maybe the asteroid hits China, or the US, or Russia, or maybe simply a leader thinks that it will, right? Or maybe the aliens will actually like the Americans and they will land in some place else, right? This simply means that not only can the threat objectively not be homogeneous, but it can be perceived as such. And those people, the rulers, are conditioned and made rulers in order to maximize gains. And if they sniff out a chance for gaining an advantage, they will jump at it. Now, confirmation bias kicks in. Of course, it's going to be a threat that disproportionately targets the Chinese. Of course, interest groups kick in at this point. Mr. President, this threat is not so dangerous to us, but it can actually make our enemy suffer much more. This is simply just relative gains. If my enemy suffers more than me, if the crisis hits my enemy much more than me, this means that I, relatively to them, will gain a lot more, right? States will try to milk this situation, be it misjudgment, mistrust, or just their best efforts being contradictory to each other. They will do it this time as well. They have done it in history. Panel, for all the reasons that I've stated, we believe that those states will behave so this time as well. Thank you.
I thank Elo for that speech. Continue the debate. I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. See ya.
In Europe and America, there is a growing feeling of hysteria. There is no monopoly of common threat on either side of the political fence. We share the same biology, regardless of ideology. I pray to God, me and you, that the Russians love their children too. Our case is incredibly simple. People want to survive above all else. Unity is the only way to go. Why? Because it maximizes my chances, right? Because now we can tap into economies of scale. When everyone works together, I can specialize in creating specific resources. I can maximize the researchers to work on specific things where there is a world expert who is a Chinese on meteorite with a specific velocity and another on a different type of meteorite who is American, right? So we can now reach better conclusions. We have more resources together, right? We think that this is incredibly important. Secondly, we think that people are just evolutionarily programmed to survive and to prioritize their self-perseverance over other interests, and we think that is stronger than past biases that are way back in the past, and we think that the future is much more threatening to us. Secondly, we think that people are rational enough to believe this, right? We think that, notice only on the info slide, it is an undeniable threat, right? There is probably very clear evidence, something that scientists have told us and is showing clear proof, right? We think that this is something that can be shown across governments, right? Because each government now shows that same proof to its own elected officials, right? We think that this is something that could probably be confirmed fairly easily, right? If it is something that is so undeniable, we think that the more time passes, it becomes even more clear, right? The more the asteroid comes towards us. At that point, we know he is much clearer, right? We have more signs, we have more changes in the atmosphere or whatever happens. Lastly, we just believe science because science is always right historically, right? We think that people trust science because science has done so much for us, and because science works as an objective truth, something that you can evaluate. That's enough on why people will believe it, right? I think, secondly, people are going to trust other humans. Why is that? Because humans generally will feel empathy towards one another, right? Again, because I know Russians love their children too, because I know that deep down we are all the same, and we all share the same basic values of appreciation of life, and we share the same joy from things, right? We share the same basic values, right? And even if you don't believe that, we think that people can do the very basic arithmetic of there is no other choice because I will die if I don't if I don't trust them, and I can't risk it, right? So even if opposition is right as to say that there is a 50-50 chance of, oh, maybe they can handle it on their own, I can't take that risk because I know that that the comparative is just unthinkable, so I must chip in. Also, we think that people generally will see that as something that is good. People don't want others saving them. They want to be also the heroes. They want to also participate in that crucial struggle. Great. Now I will go to refuting opposition. Before that, second, if you have anything.
How do you think that people that are generally against each other in the status quo would unite in a situation where this happens?
I think it comes in various forms. Firstly, I think that as Avital shows you about like how there are blocks, you know, I think that probably if Israelis hate Iranians very much, but because Iranians are, for example, under the Chinese bloc or Russian bloc or whatever, and Americans and Israelis are under American blocks, we think that is much more likely that the blocks will cooperate on a much higher level, and there will be no interaction between the very, very very heated rivalries between nations, right? I think that is enough. Now, about open opposition. Open opposition essentially says, look, the threat is unknown. It is unknown at which place it will harm and whether or not, and it will be downplayed. Because in history, we have always managed. Two responses. First of all, notice the info slide clearly states that it is existential, right? That means that it harms all places. This eradicates humanity. But again, even if it doesn't, we simply can't take the chance that I will die. Secondly, we think that it can't be downplayed because we have a precedent historically, right? We had the dinosaurs being eradicated because a huge meteor hit the earth. This is something that is proven and we know that it can happen again, right? Secondly, they say that countries will reach the best conclusion on their own. A number of answers, right? First of all, I think that governments are generally fairly rational and understand that they have less resources and less knowledge overall, so they will reach, they know that it is much better for them to cooperate. But secondly, I think that they just like know there are world-renowned scientists and people who are with Nobel Prizes, for example, or people who I know I can trust. And again, I don't need to trust my worst enemy. I just need to trust just like another country that I fairly trust. And we think that that at that point you have like blocks uniting, and that's enough. Thirdly, I think that they say, no, that, oh, I can just let the big countries handle it. Number of responses. First of all, notice that I will be extremely pressured by them to cooperate with me, right? Because I know that if I am Egypt and the US tells me to chip in, I know that if I don't do that, then later on I'll be astronomically fucked if I do, if they do manage to survive. Because at that point, I am shown to be completely untrustworthy. At that point, I am shown to be a monster that doesn't care about humans at all, and we think that that countries won't do that. Fine. Lastly, I think that survival is simply the most important and strongest incentive. Why? Because it predecesses other incentives, right? Even if I have a vengeance incentive or greed incentive, we think that I simply can't use resources from greed, or I can't exact my vengeance on others if I don't survive to do that myself, right? I think that secondly, we think that survival is something that is basic and the most common denominator between people, right? We think that is something that everyone shares as an incentive and therefore can relate to each other and understand and trust each other, because I know that they also want to survive. Lastly, I think that vengeance and greed just doesn't work, because even if I think that I can exploit them, I know that I will have time to do so later. I know that the people of my country are pushing me towards just like cooperating now, because if I don't do that, I will be remembered as someone who is immensely, who is irresponsible and inhumane. And we think that because trust and because unity maximizes our chances of survival, and because everyone, and I mean everyone, loves their children, vote OG.
I thank you for that speech, and I'd like to talk about Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
right? Am I audible? Perfect. Russians probably love their children too, and yet they are sending them to the war front to die this very minute because that's how they think they will be saved. Yes, we might think our opponents still want to live, still want to protect their children, etc. What we don't think is that they are making a rational calculus, that they have all of the information that we have, that their scientists are as good as our scientists, that all of their decisions are actually guided correctly. All of those are burdens on opening government that they never even try to fulfill. Panel, we've empirically seen this exact situation playing out on a small scale over and over again. Countries fighting each other, starting wars, even though that literally creates an existential threat for your country and for its people. It makes you have to consider death, which is the very thing they're telling us in this debate will make them think differently. With climate change, which is a proven existential catastrophe impacting the entire humanity, even in all of those situations, the world leaders never cooperate. I think that's a massive burden off to show how this is meaningfully different. What we tell you is that this situation is way less extreme. We tell you that all of the risks that all of those examples are super clear and existential risks, are super clear examples that we've seen before, are super clear examples of people actually dying, of people actually being harmed, etc. This debate is about something different. It is about a vague extraterrestrial threat, which doesn't even have to be existential. I don't know where they got this from. It has to be like impeding and undeniable. It doesn't like anywhere say about like the scale of this threat. But secondly, it definitely doesn't have to seem existential. It definitely doesn't have to seem so bad. It definitely doesn't seem to impact your specific country in the same way that it impacts China, Russia, Bangladesh, whatever. I think that all of those things makes it seem as if this debate is like way easier to like make this threat seem smaller. It's way easier to make this threat seem non-existential, even if it actually were. In my speech, two things. First of all, a case about why you don't want to lose resources in helping weak states, why even if you actually make all of those rational calculuses, even if you actually want to gather resources, it's like super stupid to give them away to countries that can't even really help you. Secondly, some weighing of Victor's case. First of all, I agree with opening government that fighting this threat is probably super expensive. You probably have to spend a lot of money on preventing the catastrophe, on like developing new science, new machinery, hiring qualified experts. You probably need to do research that is connected to space specifically, which is like supremely expensive even on a state level. Like there's very few states that can actually afford space travel in the status quo. And this debate looks like having to send research probes, sending spaceships, sending satellites, sending space telescopes, etc. All of this just to assess the danger, not even speaking about like fighting it. But also then secondly, you need to deal with the consequences specifically to help your own population. You need to be able to rebuild after half of your country has been wiped out by an asteroid. You need to be able to rebuild your economy after all of the business has been stopped for like 10 years of space war. In the worst case, you need to be able to build the spaceships to actually try to run away from Earth if it is actually going to be inevitably destroyed. All of those things are efforts that have to be centered on your own population, that don't symmetrically help the whole Earth, but that have to be like, you need to put in more resources to actually help more people. This means that I agree with opening government that you do actually want to gain resources. But I think that then it's way easier to gain resources by milking others than by actually giving them help. I think many states don't actually have anything to offer. I think many developing countries don't have good scientists. I think many countries don't really have resources. I think many countries have like a supply-based economy, economies that can't really help when fighting this kind of threat. I think that then, even in the case in which they would actually have like resources or scientists that they could give to you, I think the potential benefit is quite small. I think if you are the US, if you're China, if you're some like super powerful country, it's reasonable to not let them in if the benefit is quite small. First of all, because they've probably been your rival for years, and so plausibly they could win at your expense. They could destroy your supply chains in order to get more resources for themselves. They could convince you that you need to buy titanium in order to be able to like buy the actually super necessary lithium for cheaper prices. I think that then, for the countries that have been rivals historically, it's a no-brainer to let the others in on the research you have, on the resources you have, on the actual knowledge that you have. Secondly then, I think for super many countries, it's like very easy to just force others to give their resources away. I think if your population is starving because you're a developing country that like basically has a weak economy right now, if your population is starving right now due to US sanctions being imposed on you, and an asteroid killing everyone in like 10 years is still a secondary threat to this, you still need to like basically give the US whatever they want, because you need to be able to like basically give your population the ability to live the next day, not the next 10 years. I think there are many countries for which there are many threats that are way more impeding than this and possible extraterrestrial one. And so in this situation, it's really easy to basically force them to give you resources. In this case, for the rich and powerful, it's literally the no-brainer. The calculus is super clear. Why give something back for the resources? Why build an extra spaceship to like take citizens of Ghana or Peru if you can just like not do this and get the resources and already have the scientists that you need? I think that then there's a super clear division line between the rich and exploitative countries versus the poor who are super unlikely to get help. Closing? Opening?
Give you a bunch of structural reasons why people will see this and believe that it will be existential. You can't just say nah and then keep going.
We give you a bunch of structural reasons as to why it is likely not going to be so clear. I think there are going to be scientists who, even if they think it is existential, think that there's a particular way of solving this crisis that is the most efficient. And then obviously there's going to be a resource trade-off. If you like focus all of your resources on like doing extra scientific stuff to maybe hope for a discovery that actually like resolves your situation, you aren't going to be building bunkers because that also costs money that you don't probably have like for everything. You need to choose between pathways of actually like fighting this catastrophe. And so I think that even if you all agree that this is a super large impeding threat, etc., I think in many countries with like many different like factors influencing their decisions, etc., I think most of those countries most likely simply will choose different pathways, will like have different decision-making calculuses. I don't really think that is unclear after Victor's speech. Lastly then, let's actually weigh all of the internal factors. Why are all of those internal factors so important as to the decision's output? We tell you that the decision makers mostly rely on advisors who actually have different opinions. Because they have lots of decisions to make like every day. Because the advisors try to convince them to their own opinions and solutions. Because the decision makers in most states aren't experts, cannot objectively assess a threat. And then the thing is, at the point at which there are different factions of like experts. At the point at which one state like relies heavily on religious experts, one state heavily relies on like the sciences that they hire, one state like heavily relies on the other scientists that probably come to different conclusions at the point at which the threat is like super hard to essentially assess. I think that at this point, it is like super difficult for them to prove that all of the countries will come to the exact same conclusions and that all of the countries will be willing to even share those conclusions with the other ones. I.e., at the point at which you come to some conclusion, you're super unlikely to actually like help your enemy, to help the country that is likely to be rivaling you, to help the country that you believe are going to be undercutting you. Importantly, then what we tell you is that it isn't essentially even the scientists doing the choosing. It is the decision makers, the politicians, who don't necessarily even have to believe that the world is ending, who don't necessarily even have to believe that whatever the scientists are telling them is true. I think that's like 15 burdens that the opening government doesn't fulfill, like from the top of this speech. I think at this point, it's super clear that it's more likely that they won't come to this like magical singular path to success than that they will, which opening government would need to prove.
Thank you, Diallo, for that speech. And to open the case opposing government, member of government.
Oh, this is heavy. I think what OO tries to do is actually hack the motion, because if they want to play with words, we can also. The motion says undeniably. It means that we have fiat from all the government to explain that they cannot be denied even if scientists says it or goes to the leaders. They are right to one thing. They say that we argue a lot in many crises. But one, I would say, OG did a fair job about survival instinct and values, but they are true from OO to say to them that this didn't work in this crisis, because this specific crisis that we will have, it will be unique and it will kick out actually the things that unite the most people in the world, even if it's religion or civilization, and the weapon that actually most leaders kick in. Guys, the strongest weapon of humans are stories with a villain. And the thing is, I believe that this extraterrestrial threat will actually be aliens, because it's in the scale of extraterrestrial threat is the most weird one and the most in danger, in the higher risk. They say it can be an asteroid. I believe, one, we already have the systems to tackle asteroids, and scientific communities actually work together to tackle these things on scale and on research. And even if you don't know, but you can see it even in the movies, and it's true, when you are in the space stations, even if you are Chinese space station, Russian space station, and they're, for example, in your mission a problem, you can use each other's station, and actually they do collaborations because they know that these things are bigger than them and it can be destroying than them. So if I will prove you that in this extraterrestrial case of aliens, it will be actually united, I think we prove that because it is an undeniable extraterrestrial threat. One, guys, humans, we are racist. And I believe we will be the most speciesist thing it will be in the world. We are speciesist already, okay? One, we eat meat, we slaughter animals every day, and we make a story that this is all good and for our survival, while you can see the videos and everything. Two, all the narrative for aliens and everything that it's not human, conquer our world, that it is beneath us, or the ones that actually will come are the villains of the story. This is butter on the bread of leaders. Secondly, we have been conditioned to deceive the differences. What is the difference here? G says to you about survival and values. When you have the difference of a different species, this goes above that. It's not only survival, it's your existence. So it's prior to this, because survival instincts, they are in other crises and values. The difference in species, it's only in our side. It's easy to explain to you also, the leaders, when we do that, why you have to work and cooperate with them to all the things, because they will make the guy that looks like octopus the villain, and they will picture that actually in the media. The thing is, when in centers of conditioning the people, and actually all the narratives and all the stories of all civilizations and religion, for example, they will be the Satans in every religion. This can actually unite us. And the thing is, it will be the non-humor. So I believe that they will believe that, and they will weaponize that, the leaders, to actually do it and unite. Yes.
Personally, I think the threat may actually be radiation. The fact we already agree only proves our case.
Okay, let me tell you why they will actually. It's an incentive and capacity case. One, I explained to you the whole characterization, how humans work and how these stories are really good for the leaders. One, incentives of states. To exist and profit, they need humans. We are slaves of capitalism. They need us, okay? We need the supply chain to get all the food and everything. And the leaders, they are egoistic. I agree. The thing is, they can, but the difference is, and they didn't come from our opening, they can't communicate with the alien. They don't know this enemy. Putin and Trump know each other's weaknesses and strengths. They know how to handle this enemy. So what this shows, it is more accessible for them, even for egoistic reasons, to secure their safety and their position. And the only way to save is to share their toys with the nukes and everything with the others, because they're not stupid. They need the army capacity of the different nations to actually keep being. In space, we do it already because we know we cannot do it alone. What will happen? First, scientists know, they say to the leaders, and we have an immediate UN, NATO army. There is fear from the scientists, there's fear from the leaders as people, and the thing is, they believe that they will lose their power. I believe Russia, China will step up and negotiate hard with all the things that the OO says that they need to keep, and they will try to gain more power. I agree. They fear, but also they want to get more power and secure their position. But the thing is, they know, they are not dumb. They know the budget, they know the army. They know that they have to concess to these things to actually survive. They know that the spaceship, for example, if it's around Earth, you don't know where to hit you, so you need a base everywhere. You need to maximize the capacity and the livelihood. So it's not the war that they used to, so they need to maximize the cooperation. It means that the bases, they cannot be American, all of the others. They need to cooperate, because if it's a massive attack, they need to simultaneously defend the space. So on each country's location, it's really important. One country is better for aircraft. One country has better mechanics and army. They can negotiate and put that leverage, and they all know that if they don't do it, they don't have the capacity to survive or keep their strength. And I believe the other countries will follow, because they can offer some things, but they cannot keep up. I believe that there will be negotiations, hard negotiations, but because it will be time restricted, they will push for a concessions. Because in specific, maybe they can cut the earth like we have cut the time to control specific regions. This is an egoistic part that from the framing of OO, but I believe it's no power, no existence for my state and the way that I have believed that I'm a king, an unknown enemy, and I share this power and I unite. And the other countries, I believe they will follow because they know that it's above them. It's above every story in religion. And when they say these things to the crowd, I think they will sell it. The non-humans, the octopus guy, they want, the Satan comes to get us. Please cooperate with us and all the world to save our planet. Thank you.
I thank the Member of Government for that speech, and I'd like to welcome up Member of the Opposition.
Thanks, Brina. A human species did some wonderful thing. We did United Nations to stop wars. We created European Union to have a better trade. We are capable of rational thought and rational behavior, and I think that opening government is correct to point that out. They're also correct to point out that this is an imminent threat. It is probably a huge threat. I understand that there are some questions about it, but if there is a huge asteroid or alien or whatever, presumably, at least subjectively, we will think that is a huge threat. So there are some good points there. Opening opposition also had wonderful points about how people sometimes are irrational, how we have biases, how we are distrustful and stuff like that. The question then becomes, will we in this moment opt into our rational side and build something from it, or we will opt into irrational side? Because insofar we're capable of both, neither side proves why specifically this situation makes you opt into one or another. If we prove to you that you're more likely to opt into irrational side, the side that doesn't trust, the side that goes against, the side that doesn't want to be saved, we win the top half clash clearly. Because we win over OG, making it impossible for them to have a likelihood, and we make over opening opposition insofar we prove certainty of their biases and their analysis of psychology of people being present in this particular moment. I have a bunch of reasons I don't want to count. So, why exactly will you opt in to your irrational side? Firstly, notice that insofar this is completely unknown, this is existentially scary, the fear is overwhelming your rational side. You're constantly thinking in an emotional sense of the way, not letting the rational part of your brain being activated. It makes you more disagreeable. It makes you not look at the other people's disagreements in a good faith. You do not think, oh, this person perhaps has a solution, but much rather you look at them as a people that want to stop you, save the humanity in itself. You look at them as a bad, evil actors that will lead to the discrimination of everything that you ever loved. Do not clap, that goes against you. But secondly, you close yourselves to other solutions because insofar you're in fight or flight mode that was created for you to run from tigers, but now you have to be very precise and rational, but you cannot open your mind to other solution. You cannot accept other things because there's a too big of a proximity of damage to you. Thirdly, you have a short-termism. Insofar you are presented with something that is so imminent and so devastating negotiating. You cannot think in a long-term type of deals. This is probably a process as it is defined by the opening government, meaning that before there is unitedness, there will have to be bunch of meetings, bunch of agreements. And in all of that, you cannot think about long-term possibilities, but much rather in terms of fear, leaving this behind because it obviously doesn't work, etc. Secondly, you as a head of government, when you're doing this, when you're going on meetings, when you're trying to achieve something, you're exhausted. You traveled for days. You didn't sleep for hours, for weeks, let's say. Firstly, you're harder to productively think about anything. All of a sudden, even if it's the most rational thing to do, it becomes irrational brain of me thinks that it is not good. But secondly, you become less agreeable. You cannot talk in a good capacity with other people, making them less likely to like you and go into agreement with you. But notice how presumably this happens very fastly, like 5 years max. Firstly, notice that you are made to work with the people that fought you in wars. Russians have to work with Ukrainians. You have to work with the people that killed your mothers, your fathers, your sisters. You have to go and accept thousands of years of the oppression, and you have to just work with them and agree with them. And even if this doesn't activate the disagreementness, it constantly puts you in an emotional state of mind. You cannot think rationally when there is a man that committed genocide in your country on the other part of the table. But secondly, notice that you have to constantly go through hardships of you losing, of your agreements not going through, of United States getting something simply because they're the richest one, or something of a sort, meaning that your dignity is slowly falling behind. You feel like a loser, and you want to leave it to save some amount of dignity, to save some amount of your soul. And this is why you think irrational. Before I continue, opening.
Leaders might be overloaded for a week or a day, but eventually they make the only choice that they have, survive.
Here's the thing. We often make dumb choices. We commit suicides. We go to wars that are irrational. We often are overwhelmed with the emotions and work against ourselves. So you had to do a much more legwork to prove that. Lastly, notice what happens when there are some successes. Let's say that, you go on and achieve some agreements. Firstly, the big powers automatically want more of this deal. Automatically, they want to use this situation to assert more power in a geopolitical sense and stuff like that. There are two big problems with this. Firstly, all of the other powers all of a sudden open the feeling of historical oppression. All of a sudden, it's the same thing that happened with colonialism, or it's the same thing that happened with IDF, or I don't know. The point here is, you do not want to continue that. Even if you die, you no longer want to put yourself in the same position that your grandparents put themselves. But secondly, when people see that there is corruption there, governments will lose trust in this system. They will lose the trust that it can work. And because of this, they would lead. If the United States will only use this institution to get more money, to get more power, then what is the point of being in this institution? I do not want to be an American puppet. I want to save humanity. And if these institutions will not save humanity, then I have to do it on my own. You're emotional. You're in fear. And because of this, unfortunately, you will not succeed.
I thank the opposition member for that speech, and now I'd like to welcome up Government Webb. Here.
Give me just a sec. I have this. Every fear that you have is under the fear of death. What I mean by this, if you fear that you're gonna fall off the window, is because you're fear of death. Every fear that you have is linked to that and your need to live. I'm so proud to stand with CG. Firstly, OO says to you, states are selfish. We agree on this. States are pretty selfish. But because they are selfish, they want to keep the earth alive. They want Africa for their natural resources. They need Asia for cheap labor and technology. They need America for capital injections. They need Europe for tourism and stuff. And of course for the currency, we have a good currency stuff. We don't have only great cities in Greece. So, we believe that because states are selfish, they want to protect themselves, but they also want to protect other countries. Why? Because they have to trade. How else are they going to make money? How else are they going to sell their products? How else are they going to build their production? I'm unsure they don't prove it. But also, they say people are malicious. I disagree. People are not malicious where there is no incentive. They're opportunists. What I mean by this is that in every opportunity that they get, they kill to gain something. Now they have a shared villain that they need to be united to fight. All of these years, since the beginning of the times, they fought each other because they had the incentive. Three things on this. One, the principle of international law. Every country has the incentive to expand. What I mean by this, they have the incentive to have more land, more resources, more for their people. And now they don't have this incentive to fight each other. But CEO tries to tell us, oh, but poor things, they're going to be sleepy after the flight. Guys, come on. Politicians have jets. They sleep on the jet, but if they don't sleep on the jet, they can sleep in the hotel and take the meeting afterwards. But they say, they're irrational, they're full of fear. Exactly. They're full of fear. Not all the time though. But when I'm emotional and I cry because my boyfriend broke up with me, I cry for a day, 2 days, but then I get over it. What I mean by this, yes, I'm still sad, but my level of sadness is not at 10, is at 5. The same way goes with panic attacks. When I get a panic attack, my level of anxiety is at 10. And then it goes down and down and down because we cannot be in the same state, emotional state forever. Our bodies cannot handle it. You have to neutralize this feeling. So when you neutralize this feeling, we believe that you have the incentive to stay alive and to keep your promises to the people that they voted for you. What is that? To keep them safe and to keep them alive. What does this mean? It means that you have the incentive to actually go down and make rational decisions. And how do you make this rational decision? A, your emotions are worn off. Yes, you might get a panic attack, but these people are trained through difficult situations. They can go through it. But B, they have all the information that they need, and we think that they're capable to process it because they process with other things as well. And civilization stood up through many, many wars, such as wars that lasted centuries and centuries, and people stayed united to actually fight for the enemy. What marrow brings you? I know it sounds a little bit absurd, but hear me out, panel. This is very true. what we don't understand, we become hostile of it. When I see a snake and I don't know if it's gonna bite me or not, I'm going to be hostile about it. When I don't speak the snaky language and I cannot prevent it from biting me, I become hostile about it. But if I see a Turkish people who are supposedly to be enemies with the Greeks, we are both on this and we both might die, I will not see the other guy and say, oh, he's Turkish. I will see him as the same as me because we both face a serious threat, the death. So everybody equalizes in the threat of death, because if we all go extinct, it doesn't matter where you are born, it doesn't matter how much money you have or how much power you have. Yes?
On your best case, we prove that it is often completely logical to exploit others or just to choose different pathways based on individual circumstances.
I explained to you in my rebuttal, if you have listened, you would have known that you have the incentive to exploit other nations. Yes, but now you have no incentive to exploit the Chinese, the African people, because you don't have the incentive to steal something from them, but you have the same incentive to actually protect yourself from this space. What Mara brought you is really, really smart. Why? She explained to you in the analysis that she brought to you that people do not like or do not consider the other species as equal. We eat meat in every fucking civilization, like it's nothing. We kill animals just to produce more and more. We think that if a threat comes by, the news will actually weaponize that and make it as a villain, like we did in the religion wars, like we made the villain this. Vote CG, please.
I thank the government work for that speech, and to conclude this debate, I welcome our opposition vote.
Don't disrupt, it's fine.
Is this distance okay? Okay, good. Panel ready? Starting in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, some rebuilding and explanation of our case. Secondly, taking OG out of the debate because they don't give likelihood analysis in a this house predicts motion. And then engaging with a short diagonal. So firstly, what is happening within our speech? I think Patrick uniquely explains to you and resolves the deadlock on top half where you don't know if people are going to be rational or irrational in this type of situation. What you do know from past previous human behavior is the fact that we usually don't generally agree on things. We have different ways of tackling different issues, and there's going to be a bunch of reasons why we're not going to agree on this. But there's also going to be new problems stemming from the fact that we're going to try to unite. I think there is like 4 main issues that are going to happen. Firstly, you're going to have infighting within the governments that are trying to agree on things. Even if you start and you get the beginnings of actually uniting to fight this impending doom, at some point there are going to be so many differences that you are going to just spend so much time fighting on these and not actively making decisions. I think that the important thing here that has to be flagged is the fact that this is impending doom, which means that you have to resolve this quite quickly by the definition of the word impending. I think then secondly, in the status quo, you have distrust in institutions. This means that we believe that the UN doesn't do anything of importance because they're not effective. They don't actually resolve the issues that they say and claim that they are trying to resolve. You generally don't believe that international courts have any merit, and this is why you wouldn't believe in an actual institution that you would have to make in the situation where you would have to unite the governments. I think then thirdly, you have an incentive to throw others under the bus. I think this has been touched upon for numerous reasons. I think the biggest thing is that you don't necessarily need to trade with anyone insofar you throw the other country you don't agree with under the bus to the aliens or the comet, I don't care which one it is, and then you can control their land far more easily because you don't have to fight them. The aliens took care of that. I think then lastly is the idea that that even if none of this is true, you're still going to have the perception as a country that the other countries that you have historically fought with are not going to be on our side and you are not going to be able to unite. I think that the biggest thing here is that the problem that there is no sense of survival and like the problem of extinction that drives people enough to actively unite for this. I think this is obvious from the fact that we currently have multiple world conflicts where one side sees the other side as non-human and they're completely okay with saying, oh, these people are allowed to die. If you don't want to think about the current geopolitical things, think about the Nazis who thought that the Jewish were vermin. Think about the fact that the Americans often say Mexican and other people of color are problematic and they are aliens and they should not exist within their country. Insofar, you have the rhetoric to actively talk about the other states as problematic and as non-human. It is easy for these problematic states to justify actively kicking them out. Then talking about OG. I think the problem is that OG says that the metric is how many people are going to survive. I don't think that this is true. I don't think that they give likelihood and analysis as to like why this is going to happen. The implicit things you can get from their speeches are threefold. Firstly, you have a will to survive. Secondly, you want to survive. Secondly, you have like an evolutionary instinct. And thirdly, you don't want to be left behind. These are the implicit reasons of likelihood. I think firstly, on the you want to survive, and not at any point from OG do I get the explanation as to why myself as a Croat would be okay with working with those Serbians over there because they committed war crimes against my family like 30 years ago, and why I would get over that burden insofar I still hold this grudge. But if you don't want to buy the grudge of the Balkans, think of all of the other conflicts that are actively happening, specifically in the situation where people are getting dehumanized. I think then secondly, on the evolution, you want to survive so badly. This evolutionary instinct works that way that you're going to throw other people under the bus because you understand it is far easier for you to survive when you don't have to share supplies. It is easier for me when I don't have to share my military and the food and the clothes and the water with 8 million people when I can just sacrifice a bunch of countries that I don't care for and I can focus on myself. I think that on the idea that you don't want to be left behind, I think the problem with this is that OG claims that you're going to be doing this in blocks. I think that the idea of blocks just substantiates Patrick's case even more because blocks are probably going to be formed by the groups that already do agree with each other, which means that two blocks are never going to cooperate, which means that you never get the cooperation on the global level that you need to actively tackle this issue. But if it's not blocks, this again means that you have countries that are actively going against each other who are not going to be able to cooperate. I think then lastly on the lastly, on the idea of blocks, if not all governments actually unite, or the majority of them, or the most powerful ones, if you don't have it in blocks, then OG loses a lot of their impacts because their delta is diluted. It gets smaller. You don't get as much cooperation because blocks are going to always fight among, oh, is American bloc going to do it better than the Russian bloc? Which means that for all of the reasons that were mentioned previously, like you wanting to be the hero and you wanting to be the state or the bloc that actively tackled the issue, for those reasons, you would always want to go against the other blocks. But then also to engage with like the idea of how they would effectively do this, but before, yes.
We show you that you understand that without a very, very vast array of resources, you aren't likely to survive. That's when you get over it, otherwise it won't be over.
So that's what I'm saying. Firstly, you don't have enough resources to feed 8 million people, and you're always going to prioritize yourself having resources. But secondly, I am unsure, and I don't get mechanization from either team on government side, why I get over the fact that the Nazis thought the Jewish people were not humans, and why suddenly I would want to work with these people. I think on the idea of how effective this is going to be, I'm unsure why governments do pull resources together, and I don't know how quickly and effectively they can do this, because if this is impending doom, then you have to do it quick so you don't do it well because of all of the reasons Patrick tells you. Then talking about CG. I think CG is quite, firstly funny, but secondly interesting within this motion, because I do think that the whole idea of speciesism is a better analysis than survival. I think the problem with speciesism is first, you can be racist to multiple things at once, and that doesn't mean you're not going to be racist to other people. You can still discriminate other people, but also you still still have the hero complex kicking in of you wanting to be the reason why this problem no longer exists. And you are you are going to get over the fact that you are going to be racist. I think then secondly, on countries cooperating, I think the problem with this is that big countries are probably going to be using veto power, or they're going to prolong the combat or the solution because this is important. International law has already been dealt with. And I think lastly, on promises for citizens, I think that the problem here is you cannot make a decision because CG themselves concede that this is a unique decision you have never dealt with. Patra gives you the analysis as to why this is hard. We outweigh OO because we explain to you why this is super problematic. We engage with government bench better. I think it's obvious we are not going to unite CO.